Close your eyes and picture this. You wake up in a small, crowded home. The room is dim, the air is heavy, and the only light comes from a single, narrow window. Now imagine being told you cannot afford to open more windows, not because of bricks or building costs, but because the government will punish you with higher taxes. This wasn't just an odd idea whispered in Parliament. It was law. In 1696, Britain introduced what came to be known as the window tax. At first glance, the idea seemed clever. The government wanted money but didn't want to tax income directly. Instead, they decided to use homes as a measure of wealth. The reasoning was simple. The richer you were, the bigger your house, and the more windows you likely had. So windows became taxable property. The tax started small, but soon it grew harsher. If your house had more than 10 windows, you paid more. If it had more than 20, you paid much more. Suddenly, windows weren't just openings to the outside world, they were financial liabilities. What followed was one of the strangest transformations in architecture and public health. Across Britain, landlords and homeowners began bricking up their windows. Entire streets grew darker as families walled off their sunlight to avoid paying the crown. If you walk through parts of London today, you can still see those ghostly bricked-up spaces, silent scars of an old tax. But the consequences went far beyond architecture. For ordinary families, sealing windows meant sealing off air and light. Cramped tenements, already breeding grounds for disease, became even more suffocating. Doctors began noticing higher rates of illnesses like tuberculosis and typhus in homes with blocked windows. They described the tax as a penalty on health, or, more grimly, a tax on the very air we breathe. Writers of the time echoed the outrage. Charles Dickens described the cruelty of windowless homes, while political pamphlets ridiculed a government so desperate for money it would quite literally sell light back to its people. Yet the crown held firm. The window tax lasted for more than 150 years. Generations grew up in homes designed around avoiding sunlight. Architects built houses with false facades to trick the law, or arranged layouts with fewer windows but larger interior courtyards. It was taxation reshaping not only homes, but entire ways of living. The irony, of course, is that the tax didn't really punish the wealthy in the way it was meant to. The rich could afford to pay or build extravagant houses despite the levy. It was the poor, the families crammed into narrow streets, who suffered the most. By the early 1800s, medical reformers were calling for change. Reports linked poor ventilation to deadly outbreaks of cholera and other diseases. One doctor even testified before Parliament that the window tax had killed more people than it had ever helped feed through revenue. And slowly, the tide turned. Criticism mounted. Petitions flooded lawmakers' desks. Newspapers openly mocked the absurdity of a light tax. Finally, in 1851, the law was abolished. But the damage had already been done. Entire neighborhoods had spent generations in darkness. Architecture had been permanently altered. And Britain had learned a painful lesson about how a desperate government, in search of easy money, could end up suffocating its own people, literally. Today, historians look back on the window tax with a mix of fascination and horror. It's remembered not just as bad policy, but as a warning. Because if a government could tax something as basic as sunlight, what else might it try to monetize? In a way, the window tax is a story about control. A reminder that what seems like a small law on paper can cast a very long shadow, sometimes for centuries. And it forces us to ask, when we look at modern taxes on fuel, on housing, even on technology, are we really so far removed from the days when the air itself came with a price tag?